Welcome to the Bookshop at the End of the Internet. This podcast is dedicated to helping book lovers discover new authors. Like all the best bookshops, this podcast is filled with all kinds of books and all kinds of authors. So tune in, browse around, find a new author, and discover a new favorite book at the Bookshop at the End of the Internet. I'm Stacey Horan, author, book lover, and host of the Bookshop at the End of the Internet. This is episode number 261. For more information about this or any of our episodes, go to my website, staceyhoran.com. If you enjoy the podcast, leave us a review, like us on social media, and share us with your friends, family, and fellow readers. In today's episode of The Bookshop at the End of the Internet, I'm chatting with author Jen Braaksma about her new book, Befriending Betsy. Jen co-authored this book with Betsy Pauly, but theirs was not the typical co-authoring arrangement. Betsy Pauly sadly passed away before Jen was brought in to work on the book. Betsy left behind bits and pieces of a manuscript, as well as a devoted husband whose love for his wife drove him to find a way to see her manuscript make it onto bookshelves. When Jen was engaged to help with the book, she had to learn all about Betsy and her writer's voice. What she found was that Betsy was a woman who was kind and funny, who had a passion for helping animals in need, and was someone that Jen would have loved to have as a friend. In this episode, I'll chat with Jen about her writing journey, how she brought her experience as a book coach to bear on this project, and the challenges involved in capturing someone's voice long after that voice is gone, as well as a few other things coming up. Jen Braaksma, thank you very much for joining me today on the podcast.
It's nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
I thought what we could do today is start by talking about your new book, Befriending Betsy. If you don't mind, tell us a little bit about this book and what inspired you to write it.
The book came from a very strange series of events. I work as a book coach. I help writers write their stories, novelists and memoirists. And the idea is that I help writers write their story. So when I got a call from Chips, who is Betsy's husband, I of course didn't know that at the time, he came to me with Betsy's story. He explained that Betsy, his wife, had died a few years previous and had left unfinished manuscripts, these anecdotes about her animal welfare work, her work as an animal welfare advocate. And he asked, what can I do with these? How can I get these published? So for sure he needed an editor, but as I was looking through it, it was definitely a first draft. And as most writers know, first draft, not meant to be perfect. So there was some work ahead. And as I'm reading these stories, so I'm still thinking of myself like I'm here as an editor. Yes, I would have loved to actually talk to Betsy about this and help her, but since that was not obviously possible, I thought that I would just help Chips with these edits. But as I'm reading the stories, as I'm working on it, her voice is just so clear. She sounds like such a firecracker. She sounds so interesting. The more I read the stories, the more I kept wishing I could talk to Betsy. And the more I read the stories, the more I felt like I got to know Betsy. By the end, I felt as if she was my friend. And that sounds really strange from someone that I'd never talked to who died years before I even knew she existed. So when I was looking at this and Chip's main goal, how can I get these stories out into the world? I realized it was a draft. They were anecdotes. There wasn't a thread to pull them together. So I made a bold suggestion to Chips. I said, what if, as a framework, I include how I got to know your wife? And we can look at this not just through Betsy's stories, but look at her through my lens, how I got to know this dynamic woman, the impact that she had, and and the connections that we made. So I dove into it from a completely different perspective than, hey, I have a story in mind, let me write it. It was a really strange, but very, very enlightening and very just very exciting project to work on.
Yeah, yeah. So, who is Betsy Pauly? From what you have gleaned in reading her words, talking to Chips, spending time with her thoughts, how have you come to know her?
She was a very dynamic, passionate, outspoken individual. She sounded like somebody who had a zest for life. In her stories, she talks often of gratitude, how much she had, how the people in her life, not just her husband and family, but the friends that she met. And she pours all of that love and exuberance into her focus on rescuing these strays, the cats and the dogs, and even taking animals from a neighbor who could no longer look after them, such as the blind pigeon. It was just remarkable how vivid she came across in her stories, and it was this passion that really stuck with me because she was doing none of this for any kind of glory, if you will. She wasn't trying to become, the best known animal advocate. She was just simply doing this because that's who she was and that's what she thought was right. And I thought that that was such a profound message about how authentic Betsy came
Mm.
across in her stories.
One question I have for you, and it may be a bit tricky because when we talk about a writer's voice, writers naturally understand. They talk about, okay, I found my voice with this genre or this like first person narrative or whatever. We can talk about what we know our own voice because it seems to work when we write. It feels right. When we as writers read other writers, we're like, oh, that's definitely this author. I can tell by their voice. But what is an author's voice? How do we come to know it? Because even readers who have never written before just sort of naturally understand, feel, hear an author's voice when they read their work. So what actually are we talking about?
I think that is one of the most complex questions
Yeah,
that a
sorry.
writer can have. No, I think it's a great question because it's also one of the most important elements. For any writer out there who's ever submitted or queried a literary agent or submitted to a publisher and editor, that's always what comes up. Do they have a strong voice? What does that actually mean? From a practical detail, it could be your choice of diction, your word choice, and it could be whether you use a word like run or sprint, something on that basic technical level. That's kind of the starting point, but then you build up from there because of course you have your characters, but then you have, the author voice. Like how do we know that that author sounds like that author? So it's a choice of sentence structure, it's a choice of character. So if you're writing fiction, how do your characters sound? We're going to recognize Agatha Christie and her detectives because of the type of character they are, not just the words on the page. And when it comes to memoir, we want to feel like we really get to know the person. So when I work with my writers, the ones I can actually talk to, I focus on voice as both getting into the mind of their character or themselves if they're writing a memoir. And so it's really getting to the heart of what do they think and feel about what's happening on the page. So in Betsy's examples, she is telling us, the reader, how frustrated she was with some people who would just abandon their animals. More than frustrated, she was angry, she was upset, and so we feel her feelings. And then the joy when she sees a friend of hers come over and roll on the ground with her, with some stray pups that she rescued. So we feel the joy, and I think it's that ephemeral, evanescent. It's something indescribable with a combination of character, of what's in the writer's head, of what's in the characters' heads, that come together for us to feel, hey, I feel like I know you. In this case, Betsy, in the case of another author or writer, hey, I recognize that person.
Yeah.
So perhaps a long-winded way to say I'm not entirely sure, but that's my stab at it.
Yeah, it's that je ne sais quoi, and yet we do
Yes.
know it, right? We know
Yes.
it, but yet it's hard to describe. It's a little bit of magic. It's maybe the magic in writing and in
Yes.
storytelling. How different was Betsy's voice from your own? Because you've written your own books. So if you were to compare, were they very different, like different ends of the spectrum? Or were they close, at least compatible? How would you describe it?
So, so not total ends of the spectrum, but not entirely close. So, author's voice. Now, I've had experience as a book coach helping writers find their own voice, helping writers find their characters' voices. So I'm more attuned to this concept of voice, which I think was helpful here.
Mm.
I had two jobs in Befriending Betsy. I had to maintain Betsy's voice as I edited her stories. Remember, it was a first draft when I got it, so I wanted to make sure that her stories were clear, and her language. She plays around with words and descriptions and metaphors in such a way that I, as Jen, would never think to do. So that was her style of writing, and I wanted to honor that as I went through the revision. So that's all Betsy. But then when I wrote about my part of the book, my experiences of getting to know Betsy, and through that, my part of the book is drawing on my own experiences with animals and not just with animals and strays, but with connections as well. What Betsy got me to think about as myself. That was much easier because it was just me. So the part of me in this book is myself. Well, I know myself, so therefore I could get my own voice out. So it wasn't hard to keep the difference in voices because, hey, I see who Betsy is over here. I know who I am over here. And then the corollary of that, the two other books that I have published are young adult novels. I used to be a high school English teacher, so I was around teens all the time. I love that environment and I love the kids. And so I just felt totally immersed in that world. So when I was writing young adult, I'm writing my characters are teenagers and they're put into these crazy positions. I didn't find it hard, but I definitely found it different as an author voice than what I was using in my part of a memoir. So a range.
Right, right. I imagine this was, in many ways, a much more personal project for you, even though it started out as being maybe much less personal than it ended up being. I mean, you were approached for edits, and yet you ended up adding your own memoir to it. So that's quite a jump. Like you mentioned, that voice different from writing your young adult. How difficult or easy was it for you to put yourself on the page? It's not a character you've created, it's you. Was it frightening? Was it easy? What was that like for you?
So I work with a lot of memoirists, and I'm always in awe of them because there takes an amount of vulnerability that needs to go on the page for a memoir to be successful, for people to feel like they know who you are on the page. And I told myself I could never do that. Like I admired them, I would help them, I knew how I could help get their story up, but of course I'm never going to do that. And then this came up, but it wasn't as hard or as frightening as I had expected. And that was because I was just taking the thoughts that were in my head already. As I'm working on Betsy's stories, it was more of a natural output rather than, oh my God, here's the story I'm going to tell. How am I going to do it? It was more, I'm already thinking this.
Yeah.
And then what I did to write my part of the story was think back on what I shared with my students in the classroom. And I was, there were certain, like, I'm going to say when we got our four cats, our four rescue cats over the years, I would tell stories about that to my students. So that was my starting point. And then I would go deeper. Okay, obviously I'm going to tell the outside story, if you will, the actual events, the plot. Here we're getting our cats. And then for the book itself, I need to go deeper, that vulnerability that I tell my own writers. How do I do that? It wasn't as hard as I feared because I had been thinking about it as I was working on Betsy's stories. I was trying, kind of just pulling ideas out of my head and putting them on the page in a way that I hoped would convey not only Betsy, but would show that I too was trying to be as authentic as I could be on the
Yeah.
page.
So, having coached yourself through this process, how are you as a coach? I mean, are you tough as a coach? Were there times where you're like, okay, I know if I were talking to somebody else, I would tell them this. I tell them a hard truth about what they needed to do here. Was it easier or difficult to take your own advice?
Oh, it's so much harder. I as a coach, I'm all about tough love with the most amount of empathy I can possibly have. Empathy is my superpower. I love working with writers because I so believe in the stories that they're telling, whether they're fiction or whether they're memoir, and I can so easily encourage them. It's so obvious to me what they have and how they can go. And I get it. Imposter syndrome is such a thing for everybody who writes, but I can see what they have and I can help them with that. But then it came to me, and I'm thinking, this is what I would tell my clients. And yet I'm not doing it. No, I'm so much harder on myself. I was even when I worked with a book coach on my young adult novels, when I was just the writer, I could hear what my book coach was saying, and it was hard to internalize. I do that for my clients, but I was kind of like, ah, not so sure. So I did have to give myself a bit of grace. I had to step back and say, what would I say to one of my writers? And now I have to believe it. I'm getting better. I think that we're all hard on ourselves as writers, and I'm trying to just step back and say, no, I can do this, and what I'm going to put out there. Oh yeah, it's kind of scary. You pour your heart onto the page, and I think I'm getting better at letting myself do that without the same kind of self-judgment.
Yeah, yeah. So this. It certainly sounds like it was a challenging project, probably joyful at times and very difficult at others. But what was it that convinced you to take it on? Because if you were just approached with someone that said, "I had, this pile of stories from my wife who passed," what was it that convinced you? Okay, I want to spend my time working on this. Do
There
you
were
remember?
there were two things. One, I just love Betsy's voice, and she didn't have one anymore. And two, which goes along with that, I have the skill to get that story out there. So I've worked long and hard as a teacher, as a writer, as an editor, as a book coach. I've honed my skills over the years, and I feel like I'm good at what I do. And Chips does not have that same kind of skill set, which is why he reached out. And here I am with that skill set and this idea that Betsy does not have a voice anymore. So maybe I could step in and do it. And I think I think we were successful as a result.
So you've collaborated with authors, right? You've coached them, you've worked with them. This was a different experience because you didn't have anybody to ask. You didn't have anybody to clarify. I mean, it's
Yes.
you mean you could call Betsy's husband, but he didn't write the stories. Like he may remember some facts about something, but
Yeah.
again, they're from his perspective, they're not hers. There was in some of the information I read before we started this interview, there was a line in sort of the write up about the book about learning to channel what's missing. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because on one hand, you were having to channel Betsy, but what about channeling like all those other things that you talk about when you talk about things that are missing from time to time in writing?
So you're right. Practically speaking, I did have to talk to Chips. We had a bunch of interviews over many days, over many hours, so that there's her story, absolutely. But in order to make the most of her story, to do the edits justice, yeah, I needed a little bit more detail. But you're also right. It was from Chip's perspective. So there is a lot missing. And I think what worked for me is to simply acknowledge that not paper over it, not try to say, hey, I figured it all out, but to acknowledge and recognize that I can't know everything about Betsy, but here's what I do know, and here's what we can extrapolate, and here's why that's going to work.
What was the reaction from Chips and other people who have read the book? Have you gotten feedback? Is it how they understood her? Did it ring true for them?
Yes, yeah. Chips was a part of this the whole way through. So I would send him drafts of what I was doing, not just my part, of course, but also the edits. And did I get it right? Here's an edit from her first draft. How closely did I match up? And he was impressed that I was able to do that. And he was really pleased in a way that I think, and I don't mean this in any kind of disparaging way toward Chips, but I'm not sure he entirely believed that we would be able to pull this off. And what I mean by that is because he isn't a writer himself, he's like, is it possible to do this? But he was pleased that I was able to find Betsy's voice. And from what I've heard from the feedback of those who know Betsy, yeah, absolutely. And from just feedback in general, readers who don't know me or Betsy at all, they've really enjoyed. It's a hardening story. It's heartfelt. That's what I meant. There's some frustration on Betsy's part when she's dealing with people who don't seem to care about animals. And of course, I want to show that Betsy is not an angel in all of this. She was never perfect, but that's also part of what I loved about her was that she wasn't. So I think that the feedback that I've gotten is that people do appreciate that there is such warmth to the story in a way that just is also entertaining.
Yeah. Yeah. There's, I imagine, a fine line to walk between honoring the writer, the original writer's voice and their intention and their phrasing, etc., and trying to make it better, wearing the editor's hat. How easy or difficult was that? Showing deference to the original author, to Betsy, versus making it better, or at least what we all sort of understand to be better.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I would argue better in a sense that makes it more readable for an audience, for a reader. Yeah, there were some challenges in the fact that I certainly had to be aware of that. But I think that if I had tried to do this type of project when I was first starting out as a book coach years ago, I don't know that I would have been successful because over the years of working with different clients and different writers, and my years of teaching students how to write too, with so many different personalities, I've learned how to separate, hey, I want to honor you and your work versus if you want this out there, things have to change. So it's about honoring what the author wants out there in the world. I've worked with authors who want to only self-publish for their family. So the same types of conventions that we would expect in a published book that we pick up off a bookstore shelf is not necessarily there. And I work with them for what they want. Given that Chips's focus was let's get this book out into the world, I knew that there would be certain conventions in Betsy's draft that I would need to change, edit, revise, delete. There's certain sections that where she rambles a little bit, and that wasn't necessary for her story. So yeah, you have to be a bit harsh. There's a scalpel coming down on that book. But I think that over my years, because of my experience working with other writers, I was able to find the right balance between honoring what she wanted to say and making sure it still sounded like a story. This wasn't about like, oh my goodness, it's so sad that she's passed on. Let's put everything out there in the world. No, we're going to put something out there in the world that readers can appreciate and understand. And that's going to take a little bit of work to get to put together. But that was also part, like you said, there was joy in it too. That was also the fun of it.
Right, right. So for all the writers out there listening, editing is necessary. And you may
Yes.
not like it, but the intention is good.
Yes, yes. I tell all of my writers this, and I would have told Betsy had she come to me with her first draft. A first draft is not meant to be perfect. We writers often feel so bad about like, oh, it's such a bad first draft. And it's not because we're using the wrong criteria on a first draft. We're thinking it has to look like the polished copy, what we would find in the bookstore, and that's not the case. The only purpose of a first draft is to get your ideas on the page, then revisions and edits and such. So it's an integral part of the process. But I find that that's actually freeing, knowing that when you're writing that first draft, and what Betsy was doing here was just words on the page. Some of them made sense, some of them didn't. That's okay. Our job as writers and mine as editor and book coach, I'm going to help you get there. So to me, the editing and revision process is actually a really enjoyable part. I realize that's not common for every writer, but to me, it takes the pressure off the first draft,
Right.
and I didn't feel that pressure. I had Betsy's draft. I had her ideas on the page. Let me work with what I have, and I enjoyed doing it.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about your own books, because as you mentioned, you have two YA books out. Can you share a little bit about those?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So they're both young adult novels. One is a young adult fantasy, Evangeline's Heaven, and is the story of Evangeline as a young angel. This is set in the seven heavens before the fall of Satan, before the fall of Lucifer. There's a great battle in the heavens. Evangeline is Lucifer's daughter, and she thinks her father can do no wrong. But of course, we in our society know the reputation of Lucifer after the fall. He becomes the devil. And this is a journey of Evangeline starting to realize who her father truly is as he battles the heavens, and whose side she's on. Who is she truly? Herself, her father's daughter. So it's a coming of age story about growth and finding your own identity regardless of family and your own upbringing. The second one is also young adult. It's a young adult dystopian, and it's called Amaranth. And it's a story of a girl who, during a worldwide pandemic, which, by the way, I wrote before the worldwide pandemic, she's sought after by the bad guys, with the villains, which are deep military spies, because she has these what I've called phoenix cells, which can regenerate. So she's immune to this virus, and they want her for nefarious purposes. And there's very much a Last of Us feel to this for those familiar with the video games or the TV adaptation of it. Again, written kind of in parallel. I wasn't even aware of The Last of Us at that time, but there's a sense of, this one person where people want to determine her destiny. And this story, sure, there's the virus and there's the people after her, and there's not power so much as just what she's able to do, but it's really about her deciding who she's going to be and what she's going to make of her own life, despite what everyone around her is trying to force her to do.
So, quite a departure from Befriending Betsy.
Yes.
And you mentioned as a high school teacher, you sort of lived in that YA world. Are these the kind of books you would have gravitated towards when you were that age, the age
Oh,
of your readers?
absolutely. I gravitate toward them now. I love reading YA still. That I'm a voracious reader of. I love so many different kinds of genres. Like I love reading memoir, which is why I work with memoirists, and I didn't mind working with Betsy's stories because I love that. But writing fantasy, whether it's adult fantasy or young adult fantasy. So I love every kind of genre. But one of the things my book coach had suggested when I first started working on my own stories, hey, who is your ideal reader? Think about who you would most want to say, hey, here's this book, read it. And she suggested you can think of yourself as a younger person. And that's who I kind of picked in my head. I pictured
Mm.
myself as a teen. What would I want to read in this book?
Yeah,
And yeah, so part of it was, there's a little bit of teenage Jen in those two books.
very nice. So, what is next for you? Do you have a work in progress? Do you have a list of things you want to write? Are you just busy helping everybody else write theirs? What's up next for you?
Yeah, I'm trying a completely different genre yet again. I'm working on a literary novel. So something that's more character driven, something that's slower paced, something that focuses on language. My main character is a poet, and so I'm learning and reading a lot more about poetry than I ever have before. So that in and of itself is a challenge. So I find myself as a writer jumping from genre to genre to genre to keep challenging myself and to keep trying new things because, like I said, I don't want to settle on just one genre. And as a book coach, I've also gotten into ghost writing. So I interview. I don't just help writers write their memoir. For those people who don't want to do the writing, we set up a series of interviews and then I write their stories for them. And just as a small aside about that, my work on Befriending Betsy actually helped me with one set of clients because they came to me wanting to write a story about their mother who had died 10 years earlier. And well, I have experience writing about people who died and trying to get into their head. So for these two sisters, I interviewed them. I interviewed family members, their aunts and uncles, and friends of the family. And I've been putting together this Ruth's story, even though I've never had the opportunity to meet Ruth since she died 10 years ago. It's the same kind of concept, just talking to the people around them, finding that person's voice, just like I did with Betsy. So I'm really excited about the possibility of doing more ghostwriting work as well, either for somebody who is alive
Right, right.
or for family members who feel like I want my mother, father, I want my family's members' story told, even though they're gone. I'm looking forward to more opportunities like that as well.
Interesting. Interesting. I imagine that the ghostwriting sort of flexes a different kind of muscle than drafting your own stories. And I can
Yes.
see where each would help with doing the other.
Yes.
In writing your own stories, do you ever find yourself stepping back and saying, okay, if this was somebody else's idea, what would I do? Or conversely, if you're writing somebody else's story, do you ever think, okay, if I had come up with this myself, here's what I would do? Do you ever switch hats while you're doing it?
I'm aware that I don't want to switch hats. Like if
Mm.
when I'm ghostwriting and I'm clacking away at a great sentence and then I start to realize, whoa, wait a second, that's something Jen would say, not necessarily my client. So I have to be really aware of that, which is just yet another challenge, but one again that I really enjoy. And I think that that's kind of the pattern in my writing and my coaching life is looking for these different challenges to keep me on top of the game because ghostwriting is different. We talked about voice earlier. Yeah, I need to get that voice of that person down right. Now, for the clients who obviously are still alive, it's a collaborative process, and that's
Right,
what I really love about it.
right,
And for Ruth's story, for example, I'm still going back to her daughters and Ruth's family to say, did I capture Ruth on the page? So it's very much a matter of keeping myself out of the stories when they need to be out of the stories and making suggestions about how to put some like, wait a second, some of myself, my ideas might go well here. Now, how can I make sure of that, but still make it sound like my ghostwriting client?
right,
And so challenges absolutely, but spice of life, right?
right, right. Yeah, no easy feat. Definitely.
Yes.
Well, if people want to learn more about you and Befriending Betsy and look for new releases when you have them, that sort of thing, where should they go to find you?
My website is a great spot, jenbraaksma.com. There's information about my books. If anyone wants more information about coaching or ghostwriting, or even just to contact me to chat, you have a question or comment, I love connecting with writers. So jenbraaksma.com is the best place to find me.
Good. And if people want to pick up a copy of Befriending Betsy or look for your other books, where should they go to buy them?
Anywhere books are sold, if you have your favorite local independent bookseller, you could certainly ask about that. It's easy to order in. The big names in the business, Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, Indigo here in Canada, any of those, anywhere books are sold. If your bookseller doesn't have it, it's just simply ask them to order it in. It should be pretty straightforward for them to do so.
Good, good. Well, Jen, thank you very much for joining me today on the podcast. And I want to
Oh,
wish
it's
you
my
luck with
pleasure.
Befriending Betsy, everyone. Pick up a copy and your work in progress. We'll look forward to that. And congratulations on everything you've accomplished so far. Best of luck with the rest of your writing journey.
Thank you so much.
The Bookshop at the End of the Internet is a podcast dedicated to helping book lovers discover new authors. Like any good bookshop, this podcast features a wide variety of books by the equally varied and interesting authors who felt compelled to write them. This podcast gives you a chance to meet these wonderful writers and discover your next must-read book. Listen to the authors describe their books and tell you their stories in their own words. My interviews feature books from all genres and authors from all walks of life, including those who are indie published as well as those published by small presses and large publishing houses. Looking for unique, not so easy to find books for yourself, a friend, or a book club? Tune into this podcast and find your newest favorite author or maybe a soon-to-be bestseller. This podcast, like all the best bookshops, is filled with all kinds of books and all kinds of authors. Tune in, browse around, find a new author, and discover a new favorite book. You never know what treasures you might find in the Bookshop at the End of the Internet.